Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
When Reverend Hannah asked me to do my personal testimony, I thought it wouldn't be very interesting, insightful, or exciting. Then I thought, why not do it? Because we all have our own stories that most of us don't know about one another. You do not know how we've ended up where we are unless you have been informed. So I'm going to go back a long way back in my personal story because it's the start of my somewhat confusing, but to me interesting story. I was born in St. Thomas, Ontario on Wednesday, June 2nd, 1954. To those who know the old poem, then you are aware that Wednesday's child is full of woe. Some people would say there's a lot of truth to that. My mother was 15 when I was born, and my dad was 38. She had two more boys before she was 18, and we were all taken away by the Children's Aid Society. At various times I was with one or the other brother, but we were never all together. At age 4, I ended up in a foster care on a tobacco farm outside of Fort Burwell, Ontario. It was here that I managed to meet up with my youngest brother, Gary. According to the CAS records, by that time, this was my 14th place of residence since I had been born. Now, how many people have lived in 14 places in your lives? And by the way, since then, I've lived in another 16 places, so I've moved around a little. I don't remember a lot about the farm, other than I love the smell of the tobacco curing houses after the harvest. And even though I did live on a tobacco farm, I never got the urge to take up smoking. Another thing I remember was a very cold trek in the winter to use the bathroom. It was not something you truly wanted to do very often. But this also caused me issues when I started school in grade 1 because I'd never seen a proper toilet and I didn't know how to use it. But I quickly learned how to use this newfangled contraption. I went to Port Burwell Public School for grades 1 and 2 until the Christmas holidays, and at this point, this was my only experience with Christianity. After the new year of 1962, I was taken away again and given to a new family, the Allan family. It was not an easy adjustment for me or for this new family. They had a daughter already, who I can honestly say I didn't get along with or even like. She felt like I was intruding on her lifestyle. Many times she said to me, "It was so much better before we got you. Why don't you just leave?" I can say that at one point I did attempt to run away, and I almost succeeded. I was 9 years old, and I was tired of the lack of love that I felt from my new family. I ran out of the house with no real plan. I just wanted out of there. After walking around the town for about an hour, I decided to go to the CAS in Godrich, which was about a 12-mile walk. I ended up being located by my Uncle Charlie less than a mile from the CAS. I will say that the Allans did introduce me to the church, but they weren't the best examples, as they were churchgoers who attended regularly, twice a year, Christmas and Easter. I would walk to church on Sunday morning. It was only about a 5-minute walk. And in 1967, my dad retired from the RCF and we moved to Kingston. At this time, we started to attend St. Andrews, which was a somewhat longer walk. It would take about 60 minutes each way. It was here that I played hockey in the CAL, first for St. Andrews, and then for Christ Church Anglican. In 1970, I did the community class and became a full-fledged member of the Presbyterian Church in Canada. Now, when I was 7, I managed to break my hip and spent 5 weeks in KGH while my family was back home. I was not completely alone, though, as my grandparents visited me every day, and my aunt was my nurse. At the age of 16, I broke my back and I was gaining kgh for 2 months. The first lunch I was given was a soup and a sandwich to eat, but the doctor had told me I had to remain flat on my back. I asked how was I supposed to eat when I was not allowed to sit up. So I got fed by candy stripers for 2 months while I was in the hospital. This was a very difficult time for me as I had to give up playing hockey and rugby, two sports I really loved. When I asked what sports I could play, the doctor said I should just chase the girls. My response was, what sport? He said golf and 10-pin bowling, which I did take up. But other than that, I've had a very healthy life. Now in 1974, I started university at Trent, but unfortunately that didn't last long. When I applied for OSAP, they told me that my parents made too much money, so I did not qualify for any financial aid. Since my parents told me I had to pay for my own way in university, all I could say to OSAP people was, thanks a whole bunch. I left university in January due to financial situation. Now I knew what it was like to be independently poor, as opposed to a self-made millionaire. At least I didn't have to worry about how to spend my next million or so. What a relief. Then I started to work at the CIBC in Port Hope on April 1st, 1975. What an April Fool's joke for someone, I'm just not sure who. It was here that I met a remarkable lady who reminded me of my grandmother. I boarded at her house for 6 months, and I will say that I went from 115 pounds to 180. She fed me very well. I stayed with CIBC with stops in Unionville and Collingwood for 2 years. It was then that I was presented with an opportunity to see lots of Northern Ontario by being put into 6 different branches in less than a 24-month period. I'd only heard of one of these places previously due to Mr. Groh, the branch manager in Port Hope. And he told me at the time that I ever got transferred there, he would suggest I don't take it. He said, because the main activity there after work is the bars. So I turned him down. On July 7th, 1977, I was hired by Woolco in Kingston for the management program. I fell in love with retail with this company, and due to a major personality conflict with the store manager in Brockville, I was let go in October 1981. After much discussion with the HR department of Woolco, I was rehired on May 19th, 1982, which I worked for until retiring on July 15th of 2022. In 1990, I started a part-time job at McDonald's, which lasted until June 30th, 2022. During my original stint with Woolco, I met my first wife, got married, and had 2 wonderful children, Jonathan and Helena. We had our ups and downs, as most marriages do, but it ended after 40 years in 2019. At this time, my son and daughter wanted nothing to do with me. I sent cards and presents to them, which were returned unopened. This was a very difficult time. During the 1980s, I got very involved at St. Andrews. I originally became a member of the Board of Managers in 1983. After a couple of years, I was asked by the existing treasurer to take over the position as he had done his 6-year term. At the first annual meeting where I was introduced as the new treasurer, I thought that maybe I'd made a huge error as they wanted either an accountant or a bank manager in position because that's the way it's always been done at St. Andrews. My response at the meeting was probably somewhat rude because when I got to speak about my qualifications, I said I really didn't have what they wanted, but I was trusting that God wanted me there. I mean, as a true Christian, how can you argue with that kind of logic? During my 6 years, I managed to win the congregation over to my way of doing things. My last year as treasurer at the annual meeting, I presented the previous financial report and the new budget, and it took less than 20 minutes. During my time as treasurer, I was elected to the Kirk session as an elder. After 1 year, I was the clerk of session while still being treasurer. Again, there were questions and doubts about me being the clerk, since I was not a lawyer, a doctor, or a professor at Queen's. Again, I had to defend myself for a position that I felt I could competently do, possibly even excel at. Eventually, I was accepted as a decent clerk of session, and I truly enjoyed it. Less than 3 months after passing the treasurer's torch along to my successor, I was asked to be treasurer once again because he had been transferred to Toronto. That was quite a change from the first appointment because the congregation wanted me to take this position. During the next 6 years, I was kept very busy with church work. It was an exciting time until the last year, when it started to go downhill. Reverend Duffy retired, and a certain group wanted to move Reverend Bryant into the position as senior minister against the wishes of a large percentage of the congregation. This resulted in my first experience with the Presbytery of Kingston, but not my last. To make a long story short, it was not pleasant, and I was very depressed about my St. Andrews. I did not attend my church for about 10 years, but I did attend other churches, including Strathcona and Trinity. I finally went back to St. Andrews, and it happened to be on the Sunday that Reverend Bryant announced his intention to resign as minister of St. Andrews. It was a bittersweet day for me because that should have happened 10 years earlier, but that was not God's plan. Once again, it was not a good experience with the Presbytery of Kingston. During the time of searching for a new minister, I became a member of the Board of Trustees, and boy, did it get shook up. I questioned everything and anything and everything that they were doing, as I felt they weren't being fiscally responsible. Someone had to keep them on the straight and narrow. I also started to attend Presbytery meetings to see how they operated. I will say it was definitely an eye-opener. After a year and a half of attending Presbytery, I became treasurer, again with questions being asked about my qualifications. This time, I was somewhat prepared and had my response ready because I knew certain members of the Presbytery would not be happy to see me in the position. With my usual seriousness and bit of humor, I presented my background at St. Andrews to the Presbytery for their consideration. As you know, I did become treasurer over the objections of a few. Now, I don't want to bring up the issue that Trinity had at this time, but I feel it was a pretty good time for me personally. It was at this time that I was named interim treasurer of Trinity, which I must say was somewhat scary for me, as this congregation was very upset with what was happening. I was introduced to the congregation on a Sunday service in early June to what I can say was a cool reception. Another group who did not really want me to do what I was willing to do. I will say, though, that through everything we became friendly and learned to trust one another. There were Bill and Kathy, who invited me for dinner when it was time to hand over the financial records. There were those on the financial committee who helped me out, and I hoped I was also able to help them. During this time, I met members of the congregation who have since become my church family. We have a congregation who struggled to survive and then eventually thrive together. During this time, I was being treasurer of both Presbytery and Trinity. My question at this point is, who says men can't multitask? It was a very busy time for me, but also exciting and frustrating at the same time. I was trying to do the best for both sides, and that you cannot really do with any chance of success. At this time, I told Presbytery that they were too busy trying to do the best for your previous minister and not really caring about this congregation. This was the same thing they had done with St. Andrews twice. As a result, it was strongly suggested it would be wise for me to resign as treasurer of Presbytery To which I responded, I'm not one of the three wise men. This was not a remark that went over well. On Reverend Claasson's last Sunday at Trinity, I transferred my membership here at Trinity. In some ways, it was a very easy decision, but in many ways, a very difficult one. Can you imagine the mixed emotions of leaving the church you attended for 50 plus years to come to a church just across town? But it is a decision that I've been very happy to have made. To finish, all I have to say is that on Saturday, November 6, 2021, I met Kathy, and it was for me love at first sight. We agreed to meet at Tim Hortons in Madoc at 1 p.m. for tea. We left Tim Hortons that night at 9 p.m. As you know, we were married here at Trinity on June 24th, 2023. And today is our golden anniversary, as it is our 50th day of wedded bliss. It's a long way from 50 years, but I'll take it. And due to Kathy, I've been able to reconnect with my sister after almost 35 years of no contact. Liz happens to be on Trinity's prayer list. And to give you some background, she has battled through cancer for at least the last 30 years. She has battled breast, throat, mouth, and lung cancer, and some other ones. She has had numerous operations, which have included breast removal and having half of her tongue removed. She has been on a feeding tube, but finally got it removed about 2 months ago. And Friday night, we learned that the scan for her cancer came back with no cancer. What a pleasant piece of news. She still has many health issues to deal with, though. Also, I've been able to reconnect with various degrees of success with my son and daughter. We've not spoken since the separation, but slowly getting reconnected with one another. Again, it's a slow process, but we are moving forward. Kathy is definitely the best double-double ever. No, there are no more double-doubles available at Tim Hortons anymore. Thank you.